to be chatting this morning. I have subbed in for him now. He's kind of the founder of our company. He was going to kind of give a chat about how to build a tutoring business, particularly with the mind to everything going online. Samuel, I can very happily say, has just become a father yesterday.
Wow, that's a good event.
So yeah, we're all delighted for him. Yeah. But we also thought it was probably a little bit cruel to ask his sleep-deprived self to hop on a call this morning and talk shop with a load of tutors and tutoring companies. So yeah, this is me subbing in. So if I'm not perfectly polished, do forgive me. Just to kind of vaguely introduce the company itself and then who I am and what I'm talking to you about. So both Samuel and I appreciate the confidence, Ludo. No problem at all. Yeah, so both Samuel and I work for Tutor, which sells business management software to tutoring companies, which I can appreciate is maybe a little bit abstract. I'm just going to stick the timer on my phone, actually, now I think about it. Which I appreciate is probably a little bit abstract. But essentially, if I were to give an analogy to like a kind of brick and mortar business, then if you think of a tutoring agency or company as a shopfront, we essentially try to be the cash register, the security system, the procurement software that you go and buy your fresh stock through, all that kind of stuff. So we try to be like a one-stop shop for all the different admin tasks, essentially, that a tutoring company would need to engage in. So the company itself, it was started as an in-house project. So Bright Young Things, if any of you are familiar with them, a tutoring agency in London, were trying to figure out all of these things for themselves, essentially. And so they started building a system which could accommodate all this stuff. Samuel got involved because he was friends with the person who ran Bright Young Things at the time. They realized that it cost a lot of money to do all that kind of stuff, and that it wasn't necessarily economical for one tutoring company to invest all this in just one part of their business. So Tutor was spun out and became a separate company that went properly commercial in about 2015. And yeah, strength to strength since then, really. So we have a bit over 500 company accounts at the moment. UK is kind of our home market, but we have a lot going on basically anywhere they speak English. So US, Canada, Australia, and then bits in South Africa and India as well. So that's us in terms of me and kind of my role. So I'm from Dublin myself originally. Before Tutor found me, I was working in Taiwan for a company based in Northern Ireland selling data processing software through Mandarin, which was its own challenge, and just working out of a Starbucks over there. So Tutor, despite being a relatively small and fast-changing company, has been actually a slowdown in pace, which I kind of welcomed. Yeah, been in Tutor for 3 years, and I was trying to do my sums recently on how many conversations I would have had with tutoring companies, some small and some large. But my back of a napkin figure that I arrived at was I probably had pretty involved back and forth conversations with over 2,500 tutoring companies, could be 3,000 tutoring companies. So probably well positioned. Not all of those were just starting out, and not all of those stayed with Tutor, but yeah, probably an interesting position from which to comment on, oh yeah, well, which ones were the ones which I saw do well after that, and which ones did I not see much of anymore? Yeah, so I thought that would be a good jumping off point to go into the general kind of topic of conversation, which is how to build a tutoring business, specifically in a remote and digital world. Now, part of that is certainly going to be talking about the differences and how things change, and that's important. But what I think is probably also important, if not maybe more important, is what actually just stays the same. Because I think, especially with anything technical or online, I think people's heads often go straight to Blade Runner, when actually there's a lot of in between, and a lot of the issues are still the same. So yeah, I'm kind of going to talk about this in 3 broad categories, in no particular order. So the first one is probably as important or more important than any of the others, and this is advice that I've been giving on basically every sales call I've given for the last 3 years, is for companies to know their value proposition. So if you're starting out, from the time that you start out, or if you've started a while ago, just to start it now. Because I find that tutoring companies often think that they're in the business of tutoring, which is actually kind of only half true. I think particularly in the agency model, they're almost more in the business of facilitating tutoring between a tutor and a client, which is actually a little bit different, and it changes the way you might see your role in that relationship. So I think to that end, 2 things become much more important. The first is customer care, and the second is care for your tutors and making tutors' lives easier, essentially. So I'll start with customers. So generally speaking, if all they wanted was for someone to come around to their house once a week and talk about maths, well, they'd have other places to go for it, but they're also coming to you because you can facilitate their relationship. You can find them someone trusted, someone reliable. You can send their invoices and explain what the charges are and provide external services and all of those other tangential things, which are going to help clients feel a bit more cared for. And trust is such a vital part of tutoring, and that's definitely not something that's going to change. Because essentially you're asking parents to trust you or your tutors with the education of their child, and there's a lot of side products that go along with that. It's very much not a simple service, and the more faith that you can give them that you're going to do it well and you're going to look after all the extraneous details, the more comfortable they're going to feel, and the more inclined they will be to work with you. I would also say, it's probably 40% of every sales call I have with a new customer, they mention, oh, well, I'm an absolute technophobe and I don't do software very well. So yeah, you can't talk to me about any software things because I won't know where you're going. And I understand why that puts business owners off, or they think of it as a disadvantage to themselves. But in many ways, I mean, I certainly, when I joined Tutor Country, I would have thought of myself as a technophobe, even myself. That's kind of an advantage because, the techies might be smart, but we technophobes have greater numbers. So your clients are probably technophobes as well. And once you know that they're technophobes and you're one yourself, well, you can get into their head a little bit, and rather than sending them down rabbit holes of online forms to fill out and this kind of thing, you can empathize a little bit more and say, no, actually, we're going to provide a more personal service. We're going to hold your hand a little bit because that's part of the value proposition that we're providing here. I think we often get companies coming to Tutor Country who want to automate everything that they possibly can and just have almost like a passive income stream where they sit back. These new clients just like filter through this technological funnel, and then they pick the tutor that they want to work with, and then the lessons just pop in the calendar somehow. I would say to that, generally speaking, I think those companies don't tend to do as well as the companies that are prepared to manage a client relationship. And if you doubt that, or if you are looking for a concrete example, if you I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is just my Wi-Fi provider. So when I call them up and I have a problem and I can't speak to a human being, I would be prepared to pay a premium to speak to a human being. And so you have the opportunity to be the broadband provider who talks to their clients. And it's a very different industry, but if you're able to be that person, you can really capitalize on it. And it's something that people will pay a premium for, especially in the tutoring space, again, in my experience. And then even once you have that, so you know what your value proposition is to the clients and the fact that you're going to hold their hands and look after them. And then you really have something to advertise, because instead of just advertising maths tutoring, which fine, you might want to advertise maths tutoring. There's lots of good reasons that you just advertise that. You can advertise maths tutoring with an agency that cares, or maths tutoring that like goes the extra mile. And those are the adverts that really stand out when you communicate your particular value proposition. Because sure, if someone's looking for maths tutoring, they might click on your ad if all it says is maths tutoring. But if it says maths tutoring and we take all the frustration out of it, they're so much more likely to click. You're so much more likely to get engagement in that case. And then the other half of this, which I think is at least equally important, but forgotten about much more, is actually looking after tutors and how they play. Because I think a lot of tutoring companies or tutoring agencies think of tutors as maybe suppliers or maybe even the products. But actually, their tutors are in a way just as much your customers as the parents are. You can also provide something of value to them. And if you do provide something of very demonstrable value to tutors, you're going to make life not only easier for them, but also very likely easier for yourself. In my experience, what I kind of mean by that is that tutors, generally speaking, want to teach. So they got into it because they enjoy teaching. Most people didn't get into it because they enjoy invoicing clients or chasing clients for payment. They probably don't enjoy advertising their services. I don't even know that salespeople particularly enjoy selling their services. So if you can take the weight off tutors' back to have to do those extraneous things, and you can just say, listen, you're in this because you enjoy teaching and that's what you want to do. So you just do that and then I'll look after the other stuff. That's really powerful. Now, a valid response to that might be, listen, I provide my tutors with money, so where's the harm in that? They get their money and then they do some of the extraneous stuff and you go from there, which is a fair point, and it's obviously not something I could completely contradict. I mean, we're all financially incentivized at the end of the day. But if a tutor's only motivation was cash, then they could pursue clients fully privately. Like they can take people on independently and run those extraneous services. And it comes down to the fact that in that case, that they don't pay a cut. Now, this is where my tangent runs a little bit close to the kind of the big dirty word in the whole tutoring industry, which is poaching. But in many ways, I don't think it's something to be particularly afraid of. It's certainly an alert. It's a red flag if tutors are leaving your agency and working outside. And people try all kinds of ways. Like I'll regularly have conversations with clients who say, "Oh well, I need to get my tutors to sign contracts, and I need to prevent them from ever getting the client's contact details, or I need to monitor their emails or instant messages or something like that." And not to say that there's no reason that you would do any of those things and that they don't have some place in some businesses. But ultimately, if a tutor is better off teaching privately, they're probably going to want to teach privately, whether that comes from one of the clients that you send them or clients that they find off their own bat. So the best prevention is just to offer tutors something of value so that they don't want to look elsewhere. You can stand on the shoreline with a big spear and fight the tide, or you can build a house that floats, essentially. So you're probably better off in a floating house. So it's a good motivation to say, okay, well, what could we provide? And then it goes back to what we mentioned before, the tutors don't necessarily want to do. They don't want to invoice, they don't want to advertise, they don't want to sell, they don't want to hold clients' hands as they go through a buying process or worry about their child or look for performance reports and all these kind of things. So I thought that might be a good point in time to jump off into just like kind of a few little breakout rooms, little discussion rooms, just to talk about, particularly from the tutor perspective, as a tutor yourself, what would incentivize you to stay with an agency and what could they offer that, even if there were no impediments at all for you to go private, what could they offer that would keep you with the agency, that would make you want to stay? Or even from an agency perspective, how could you do that? How would you want to do that? What would you not want to do? All that kind of stuff. So maybe we break off for 5 minutes and then, yeah, reinitiate our chat.
Excellent. Thanks, Fionn. Yeah, we've got the breakout rooms all set up there. So we urge you to turn your cameras on, because talking to someone who doesn't have their camera on is much harder. So please, if you're able to, please try and turn your cameras on. And the question that Fionn is posing to us for the next 5 minutes in our breakout rooms is going to be, what would incentivize you as a tutor to stay with an agency? And I know that we have several agency leaders here with us. I don't think that changes the direction of the question. You're still able to answer that question even as an agency leader. In fact, you may never really have thought of that question as an agency leader. So I'm going to pop you, I'm going to pop you into breakout rooms, and we'll be back here at about 25 past. So I'm going to open those rooms now, and I'm going to pop people into breakout rooms as we go.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're all back. I hope the conversations went well and were vaguely interesting. Yeah, it'd be fantastic to hear maybe as we go on what came up. So that's kind of it for my point about knowing people's value proposition, or companies knowing their value proposition. The next point that I would make is something that would changes more in an online marketplace. And that is just that in an online marketplace, which is always going to be a more volatile marketplace, it really benefits companies of whatever size they are to think big about their business, about the services they provide. With any online service, the winners are going to win quite big, and the small agencies are going to be increasingly pushed out and sidelined. Sorry about the background noise there, if that's coming across. So local tutoring has always been kind of a mainstay, particularly in the UK, and also, just so when tutoring companies starting out, or even quite large tutoring companies, tend to focus within a geographic region. So maybe it's, Wapping or something. It's maths tutors Wapping they might pick. And let's say they choose Wapping, they market their services there, and when people in Wapping want math services, they find them. The difficulty with an online marketplace is that those options are no longer available, because if you're in Wapping and you're looking for maths tutoring, but it's all going to be online, you don't type in maths tutors Wapping into your Google search to find companies. You just type in maths tutors, which definitely makes things more challenging. It erodes that local flavor to tutoring, and it concentrates tutoring services in the hands of big providers. So it's like with everything else, you know, the high street, the independent high street stores are more inclined to close, and the bigger online retailers do particularly well. You could expect the same thing with tutoring. There will be some impediments to that. Tutoring, as I said, is personal and will remain personal. So it's, again, don't want to go Blade Runner, but that is the direction in which the industry was moving prior to COVID, and is almost certainly going to move faster towards after COVID. So it's worth putting yourself in a position to exploit every opportunity to be one of those big players, because the small players who have been relatively happy bouncing along the bottom are going to find that more difficult. There's going to be less nutrients along the ocean floor, and there's going to be quite a lot more up towards the surface. So how do you put yourself, I suppose, in the position to benefit from that? Is essentially just to exploit every opportunity that opens up. So the 2 points within that I would make is to focus on efficiency within your business. And then what leads on from that is focusing on developing flexibility. And you kind of have to do the first before you do the second. So what I mean by efficiency is just streamlining your processes and not wasting a load of time unnecessarily. So I think our marketing woman pulled some stats for me about the average micro business, so not in tutoring necessarily, spends 15 hours per week on financial administration tasks alone. Now, I don't know exactly what the figures are for the tutoring industry, but I certainly wouldn't imagine them being lower than a micro business, generally speaking, because tutoring is intensely admin heavy. That's being that kind of agency model means that that's almost most of your job is just admin work to connect people and look after relationships like that. I think that this kind of means that the era of the tutoring company run with Excel spreadsheets is probably at a close. And there are many businesses which can be run with Excel spreadsheets, and if you're doing it that way, that's phenomenal. But it's not scalable. The question is not what you think your business currently is able to do. The question is, well, in 6 months' time or a year's time, how am I going to cater for that setup then, for my new setup, for my new clients, for my new contracts and all that kind of thing. So that's how efficiency, which is the first point, kind of leads into flexibility, which is the second, which is the less time that you spend in an average week looking after your existing clients. Not only do you have then more flexibility, more time to spend onboarding new people, but you can also find opportunities which don't align perfectly with your business model when it starts out. So perhaps you're running off Excel and you're spending basically all your time doing it, and then someone comes along to you with an opportunity to take on some lessons in a tangential field. How would you handle that? It's gonna be more administration for you to do. So if you aren't spending that much time on administration already, then you can take it on. But if all of your time is taken up with Excel spreadsheets at the moment, you have to turn down those opportunities and certainly not look for them actively. So those losses begin to add up. And I would say that all of the successful businesses that we have with Tutor Cruncher, and I think this generalizes to every industry in the world, is when a business becomes successful, it doesn't become successful in the way that it thought it was going to be successful. It just becomes successful in the opportunities that presented themselves nobody had any idea of when they started the business. So if you want to exploit those, it's probably best to lean into serious efficiency in your existing workflow, and also flexibility in adapting to this kind of thing. So for example, if you do maths tuition maybe, but you have someone approaches you at one stage and says, well, actually, I want to take trombone lessons. And then you say, well, okay, we don't really do music lessons. Oh, but there is this maths tutor who I think plays the trombone. Maybe they could sort you out, but hold on, then I have to like find out how well they can play the trombone, and I have to get into a whole like grade system. Yeah, if you're already at max capacity with the other stuff, then you're going to say, oh, no, sorry, we can't do trombone. But maybe if you have the flexibility, you say, oh yeah, okay, well, listen, I'll talk to this guy. I'll see how well he plays trombone. And then maybe I can set you up. And then maybe that kid refers 10 others. And all of a sudden you're in music school instead of being a math center, which I think is so often how these things pan out. So I thought that might be a good opportunity, especially in the UK with the NTP, or National Tutoring Protocol, that just happened, because that's the prime example of people handed contracts for thousands or tens of thousands of students to provide tuition to that they had no experience of before. Even quite small companies handed huge contracts like that. So I thought, as a second little breakout, maybe it's worth a chat about if your company or you as a tutor were handed a ton of, say, like 10,000 new clients that you want to be taken care of, how could you cater to that? How could you reform your business so that in 6 months, if that opportunity comes along, you could actually take it, as opposed to saying, no, I'm sorry, we just can't. We can take 1,000 students and we're like up over our ears anyway.
Wonderful. Thanks, Fionn. Okay, so straight back into breakout rooms for another just over 5 minutes. I will open those rooms again now. And let me just pop those of you who've joined us just now into those rooms.
Over to you. Nice to meet you, Martha. See you, Fionn.
Fantastic. Yeah, so I hope those conversations went well. I am basically going to undercut them almost a little bit by now completely contradicting myself to my third and final point, which is only a half contradiction, I suppose. But in order to get to that point at which you can think big, especially for new companies, which is what this talk was about, you've got to start by acting small, which again does sound like a bit of a contradiction. But actually it's kind of the only way to think big almost. Again, I'd go back to the fact that tutoring, generally speaking, because it's been done so locally, this was almost self-evident, because if you start in Southend-on-Sea, you do, science tutors in Southend-on-Sea, and that's your natural foothold, and then you expand from there. But when that local area foothold starts to erode, you're going to need to find that foothold in different ways. How do you eat an elephant sandwich? A very good analogy there, Julia. So how do you get a foothold when you can't just exploit where you happen to sit? Is essentially just by finding a niche. So let's go back to our example maybe of trombone lessons. So you could set up a business and you do your website and you want people to start coming through to you, and your keywords that you're hitting absolutely everywhere are online tutoring. And that's great, because obviously you want people who are searching for online tutoring to be able to find you. But at least when you're starting out, they're not going to find you by typing online tutoring into Google. And this is, at this point, we kind of verge on SEO, which we can talk a bit more about. But if the only keywords you're hitting are online tutoring, you're going to be on the 10th page if you're lucky, and those people aren't going to come through. So you need to establish a foothold, but you can't rely on Southend-on-Sea as the term through which people will end up finding you. So maybe a way to do that, we go back to our trombone lessons, is, okay, well, I'm not just providing, you know, English tutoring or maths tutoring or online tutoring, even more general. I'm providing trombone lessons to people in Kent and Sussex. Now, not many people search, I imagine, for trombone lessons online in Kent and Sussex. And maybe it's not viable, but maybe it is. And maybe few people search for it, but the people who search for it are extremely likely to click on your website and to talk to you and to chat to you, and that counts as your foothold. And this is where it links in with that second point, because then once you become good at providing trombone lessons in Kent and Sussex, then you stretch up to London, or, you know, you go west and maybe you end up providing them in Devon and Cornwall, and then you go north, and then it's the violin as well as the trombone, and you evolve that way. But you need some kind of foothold to get in. And this, it's kind of a general point to choose specific keywords that you can monetize. And we are kind of going into SEO territory here, which is a very inexact science, I always say, because I get clients asking me on calls, should I go to, search engine optimization, to be clear. So should I go to an SEO agency who are going to help me get listed really high on Google and let people find me on there? And I usually advise them to use a litmus test, which is something that you're very welcome to use yourself. That if you go to someone who's saying that they can advise you on SEO and on getting your service listed high, the way to figure out if that person knows what they're talking about is to just ask them, do you know, are you an expert on SEO? And if they say yes, then they don't know what they're talking about, generally speaking. Because nobody really knows how it works, and it's all Google's magic box. And if anyone ever figures out any aspect of it, then they just go and change it anyway. So yeah, it's an art much more than it is a science. But as a general principle, going after a narrow audience well is better than spending a lot of money to go after a very wide audience against huge players in the industry. You know, you're going to bankrupt yourself. And again, we kind of go back to those agencies who come to us quite a lot and think that they're going to be a fully hands-off automated system that's going to run in the background, and it's going to be passive income, but they're going to be like the Facebook of tutoring or the Amazon of tutoring. Those companies are only in the position to be Facebook and Google and Amazon because they started small. And they built up to something slowly, which they could then capitalize on. But you can't go from 0 to 100 without passing 2. So yeah, that's essentially it in terms of my third point. To just think small before acting big. And then the only other point was just to think about the value proposition that your agency is providing, not only to clients, but also to tutors themselves. So that's pretty much it. That was all of the points that I really was going to talk about today. I know, Ludo, you mentioned that maybe we could hear back from some of the people in those breakout rooms, just very quickly maybe, as to some of the more interesting conversation topics that cropped up.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you guys have got any thoughts from either of those breakout rooms, maybe we'll start with the second one because it's probably freshest in the mind. The question was how do you cater for an influx of tutoring business all at once? How do you set up your systems for when you do go global and suddenly you have clients from kind of all around the world? The hint is that Tutor Cruncher will help you with that. But what ideas did you guys discuss in those breakout rooms? We've got about 5 minutes left, just under 5 minutes. So please feel free to dive in.
So if I can go, and I was saying that in our breakaway room is, I've always said, be careful what you wish for, you might just get it, and best you be ready. And if someone said, you know, would you be willing to take on 10,000? I'd say, well, you know, is there a possibility of getting 20,000? Because I think that people need to understand that you can't do things alone. And really the essential part of doing anything at whatever scale that involves more than one person is to get the right team on board. I've been involved in projects similar to, you know, here's a contract, we need to get on it. So what I've always done is the team that I've always brought on is being absolutely 110% transparent on the mammoth part of the task, which means you're going to work 18 hours a day. You're not going to have a life. You don't have weekends. This is the project. And it has this duration. And the flip side to that is that there's a curriculum value to the, as a result of that project that can be a benefit once that project is over. So what you're doing is you're really weeding out the people that are looking for a job or the people that are looking to make an impact and be involved in a project. And there is, you know, those people out there. Simon Sinek talks about a story about that expedition to the South Pole, where the ad on the newspaper said, you know, he was looking for, if you're looking for adventure, we're organizing a trip that you might not come back from, but you will be legend. And he got a team to go with him to the South Pole, and they nearly all died. So I think transparency is key. And I think something that I've picked up from this week is that I don't know how many people have had leadership training or been on leadership courses, because leadership is not an easy thing. You're either born with it or you got to learn it. And when you're working within leadership, you're working within a layer, and each person in the organization works within that layer, and each layer has KPIs that you need to be accountable for. As a tutor, it's easy for you to go, and being an agency owner, it's easy for you to go into tutor layer because that's your comfort zone, you know. So it's how do you keep yourself on the owner layer, and what is your objective, and what are your KPIs? Because in those KPIs, there is your DNA that you want to make sure you don't lose. Because why do people go down into comfortable layers? Because it's my baby and I know how to do it properly and no one knows it like I do. No, you cannot scale up if you continue within that mindset. So you got to work within your layer and be really, really disciplined about working within your layer. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very interesting. What do you have time for anyone else to do though, do you think, or is that probably us?
If anyone else wants to drop in, then please do. Thank you, Miguel. Ian Manzi has joined the meeting, so we'll be kicking that off at midday. But if anyone else would like to drop in, then please do. You've got a 30-second elevator pitch style feedback from your breakout room. But if not, John.
I would say from our group, yeah, we were looking at if you can stage the growth, then do it. And the other thing that from personal experience, I would say is be very, very careful about your supply lines. You have got to audit those supply lines and make sure they are absolutely rock solid before you enter into that kind of project. And you may have to do that very, very quickly. So you might even argue that you should be doing that at the moment, so you're ready for that opportunity when it arises.
Excellent. Thanks, Julian. Wonderful final word. Fionn, first of all, congratulations for stepping in at the final minute and delivering such a polished, I thought, and thorough description really of how to go from small to big to bigger. If any of you would like to visit Tutor Cruncher, then the link I put in earlier in the chat, or you can find it in the Festival Hub in the event section of this event. Go and check them out. They work just as well with private tutors as for larger agencies. So really they cater for everyone. Was there something you wanted to add just before we finish?
No, that's it for me. Put a cap on it very well. And yeah, delighted that I had the opportunity, circumstances as they were, to come and chat to you all. So I hope you have a lovely rest of the festival. And I think I'll be talking to you again in a couple of hours. At
2 p.m. as part of the International Tutoring Roundtable. Thank you so much, Fionn.
Thank you, Fionn. Thanks so much.
Chat to you soon.
So
all the
lovely
best.
to have Tutor Cruncher here. Thank you.
Bye-bye.